Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really powerful. It's a framework that completely reframes how we think about student harm. We're not talking about just misbehavior. We're talking about a public health crisis, and it's all rooted in the science of addiction.
All right, let's get right into it. And we're not going to start with a bunch of data. We're going to start with a story. A story that's probably going to feel way too familiar for a lot of parents out there. It's a pattern, really, that shows just how predictably this stuff gets worse when it's not stopped.
Okay, just look at how this plays out. Week 2, a push. No big deal, right? Except nobody steps in. By week 4, it's not just pushing anymore. Now there are verbal taunts. Week 6, the victim finally speaks up, and what do they hear? Work it out. Think about what that teaches a kid, that asking for help is pointless. So of course, it gets worse. By week 8, the aggressor has backup. And by week 10, the victim is gone. They've stopped coming to school, and the aggressor? They're already looking for a new target. See, this isn't random at all. It's a textbook escalation. And it happened because the system, the adults, they failed to step in the right way at every single turn.
And this is the whole point, right here. The school saw this as, I don't know, boys being boys, just a little conflict. But that's not what was happening. Not at all. What they were actually watching was the beginning of an addiction cycle.
So, how do you stop it? Well, you have to stop getting the diagnosis wrong. To really stop the harm, we have to completely change how we see the problem in the first place.
And that's where this bullying as a drug framework comes in. It says this isn't just bad behavior, it's a full-blown addiction to power. And that one little shift in how you see it, it explains everything. It explains why stuff like detention or forcing an apology letter almost never works. I mean, think about it. You can't mediate an addiction.
Now, this is where it all just clicks. The pattern for substance addiction lines up almost perfectly with what we see in bullying. You start with experimentation, that first little push. Then comes tolerance. That same little push doesn't give them the same feeling anymore, so they have to escalate to get that reward. Then comes dependency, where their whole social identity is wrapped up in being the one in power. And withdrawal. What happens when the victim finally leaves? The aggressor just finds a new target. The playbook is exactly the same.
And listen, this isn't just some clever metaphor. This is real. It's actually rooted in the neuroscience, in what's physically happening inside our brains when we gain power and when we experience trauma.
Because in any one of these situations, you have two brains having completely different experiences. I mean, they're polar opposites. One brain is getting rewarded, lit up with dopamine. The other brain? It's being traumatized, flooded with stress. And that is the core of the problem.
Let's break down what's happening in the aggressor's brain. When they harm someone, when they exert that power and see they can get away with it, their brain gets a shot of dopamine. And yeah, that's the exact same feel-good chemical that's involved in drug addiction. So their brain is literally being trained. It's learning a very simple, very dangerous equation. Power equals reward.
At the exact same time, the victim's brain is going through the complete opposite. It's being swamped with stress hormones like cortisol. And we have to be super clear here. This is not just feeling sad. This is real, measurable, physical damage to the brain. We see the same kind of neurological changes in kids who've been through other severe forms of abuse. It messes with memory, it creates this state of constant fear, and it can even lead to something called learned helplessness, which is where the brain basically gives up trying to escape. It adapts to the trauma.
So, okay, if the science is this clear-cut, why do schools keep getting it so wrong? It's simple, really. Their entire response is built on the wrong diagnosis. They're treating an addiction like it's a simple disagreement. And in doing that, they're not just failing to help, they're actually becoming enablers.
I mean, it just doesn't work. You cannot mediate an addiction. But that's what schools try to do. They pull out their conflict resolution toolkit for a behavioral addiction. It's like telling a kid to go work it out with a can of asbestos. It's absurd. And these tools, they don't just fail. They often make the whole situation much, much worse.
Just take a look at the typical school playbook and what actually happens. Peer mediation, all that does is reinforce the aggressor's power. Those little informal talks, they just scream, hey, there are no real consequences here. And telling a victim to work it out, that teaches them the most damaging lesson you can imagine. Adults are not going to protect you. Not a single one of these things does anything to stop the aggressor's reward cycle. In fact, they usually just feed the addiction.
Okay, so enough about the problem, let's talk about the solution. Because this framework doesn't just diagnose the issue, it gives us a clear, actionable way forward. And it's based on safety principles we already use for pretty much every other public health threat.
The whole game changes the second you stop calling it a behavior issue and start calling it what it is, exposure to a toxic environment. Think about it. If a school found lead paint or asbestos in a classroom, what would they do? Would they hesitate? Of course not. The answer is obvious, and that exact same logic has to apply here.
And here's the protocol that comes out of that logic. First things first, this is not about punishment. This is a safety procedure, plain and simple. Step 1, you immediately stop the harm. You get the victim out of that toxic environment. Step 2, you assess the damage. What support do they need? Step 3, and this is so important, you fix the environment. You deal with the source of the problem. Only after you've verified it's actually safe can the victim return. And then you monitor. You watch to make sure it never happens again. It's just common sense. It's safety first, and it puts the victim where they belong, at the center of the response.
And what this does is it gives parents the exact words to use to demand action from the school. You're no longer arguing about discipline, which is subjective. You're talking about safety, which is non-negotiable. This single quote can reframe the entire conversation and put the power back where it needs to be.
So what are the big takeaways here for parents? It really comes down to a whole new vocabulary and a new toolkit. Stop using the word bullying. Start using terms like toxic exposure and trauma. Every time something happens, you document it as an exposure event. And you track the very real symptoms, the trouble sleeping, the not wanting to go to school, as evidence of the physical harm being done. That is how you fight for your child's safety in a way the system can't ignore.
So we'll just leave you with this one question to think about. If a school found asbestos in a classroom, would they seriously tell the students to just work it out? Of course not. And once you start seeing this kind of harm as the toxic exposure it is, the absurdity of how we currently handle it becomes crystal clear. The answer is obvious, and the right way forward should be too.